Welcome everyone to the Share Art session today. We've got a really interesting Share Art today, which is focusing on the Exploring Collections project from 2022 called the Bobby Baker Diaries. So my name's Anna Falcini and I'm facilitating today for the session, and I'm supported by Beth Hopkins, who's the Artist Development Manager. We have two wonderful artists today who are sharing their work, and the artists are Lynch and Myriam Crété. They were both selected for the Bobby Baker Diary project last year for the Exploring Collections, and they're here today to share that particular work with us, and we're going to sort of see what work they did which came out of that project. Just in case you're not so familiar with the project, I'm just going to give a little explanation before we sort of go on to the artist's work in a moment. But just a few housekeeping things really. Just as always, I really want to thank the artists today for their generosity really in sharing their work with the outside-in community. And also thank you so much for the audience who've also come today, and your support is always greatly appreciated. So we probably will, I guess the session will be about 45 minutes long today. We're going to have, first of all, Amanda's going to talk about her work, and then we have Myriam, who's the second artist, talking. We will then have moments where we can perhaps have a little bit of, time for questions and conclusions at the end. And then we will finish hopefully around 2:15, slightly shorter today than some of our usual Share Art sessions. Just to let you know that we are recording the session today for outside-in purposes. If anyone is not comfortable with that or doesn't want to be on the recording, if you can let Beth know, and then we can sort that out and edit that out. If you're not familiar with the Share Art, what happens is each artist has about 10 minutes to present their work. And we will have a chat function open, so if there's anything that occurs to you during the artist presentations, you'd like to kind of give any feedback or ask any questions, then you can put that into the chat. And what we will try and do after each artist is just to have a little kind of like look at the chat and see what comes up in that chat box. So anything else I need to say there? Maybe. So yeah, just one thing, maybe if you have your audio turned off during the presentation, that would be helpful, just in case of any background noise that might happen. So I'm going to go on to the first slide, which just gives a little bit of overview about the Exploring Collections Bobby Baker's Diary course that the artist did. If you're not familiar with the Exploring Collections, just to say a little bit about that first of all. So Exploring Collections is one of the training courses which is offered by Outside In, and this is part of their overall Step Up training programme, which is run by Kate Davey. The Step Up programme is sort of offers training to outside-in artists so that artists can gain skills and knowledge which will help them to perhaps develop their creative practices. And within that, we have the Exploring Collections course, which provides participants with skills to research and respond, particularly to museum collections and gallery collections and archives. I think it's a really lovely course that is so interesting and always kind of produces really interesting work. So in this particular Exploring Collections course, there are around 6 or 7 artists, I think, who worked with the Bobby Baker Diaries. And these were produced by Bobby during her time as a patient at a day centre in 1997. And the drawings were made in pencil and watercolour, and they document the ups and downs of Bobby's mental and physical health. And I think there are over 700 drawings and sketchbooks, which I'm sure Bobby will be able to confirm. And Bobby has displayed them in different ways through things like exhibitions and publications. And they are a fantastic resource. And one of the things that Bobby has said that she wanted them to do was to change the way that people think about mental health. So the diaries were really a process for Bobby to enable her to sort of, I suppose, process her experience of the mental health system, including the treatments she underwent and the acute and sort of some of the experiences in the sort of acute psychiatric wards. And they became a way to communicate the complexity of those experiences, her thoughts and emotions, to those close to her and the medical professionals that she was in contact with. And one of the things that I was quite intrigued by was that they are obviously quite sometimes very private things that, you know, Bobby may have done, but then, you know, they've come into the public domain as well. And so there's this kind of like interesting tension sometimes between this, the private and then, you know, being in that mental health system, I'd imagine, where you're, you know, you're being kind of assessed for your health and things. The drawings are now digitized, and you can see 17 of the drawings on the Outside In website in the digital exhibition, which is called Oh, I Love That. And it's fantastic because you can go in and you can see individual drawings which Bobby talks about. And there's also a really good resource on the website called In Conversation, which is a conversation between Bobby and Hetty Judah, and is hosted by Claire Montier from Outside In. And so that there's some really wonderful kind of things to kind of explore there. So that's a little bit about what the Bobby Baker Diary Exploring Collections course was about. So we're going to move on now to the two artists. So I'm delighted to present first of all Amanda Lynch. So Amanda is a multimedia artist, and she works across sculpture and with 2D works. And Amanda explores social engagement and practice within community-based projects. She has work in both private and public collections and has exhibited widely, and also done a number of artist residencies, which if you go onto Amanda's website, you can explore that, which is really interesting. So I'm really delighted to hand over to Amanda now, who will be able to kind of talk more about her work. So when you're ready, Amanda.
Thank you. Just a quick one. Thanks to everyone for being here to listen. And yeah, I'm looking forward to giving my presentation today. So thank you, Anna, for doing my slides as well.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I'll just carry on from Anna's great introduction. So hi, I'm Amanda. So as Anna said, I'm an artist, curator, researcher now, with special interests within disability arts. So for my own personal practice, I am a mixed media artist, specialised in sculpture and then moving on to assemblage. So however, since the pandemic, I've had to move to a 2D format because I don't have a studio. So that includes working with collage and paper. So my most recent work includes doing an exhibition called Restriction, which was an exhibition held online of miniature artwork set within an old printer's press. So there's 1,125 individual pieces of artwork that were included from 250 artists across the globe. So my other work examines digital access within the arts and how can an artist thrive within a digital setting. So my work has moved into more of a researcher's practice over the recent months, which has been quite an interesting shift. And next slide, please, Anna. So Bobby Baker. So my work over the duration of the Bobby Baker course had taken many twists and turns. Firstly, I started to explore the language within the work, looking for small snippets of text. I'd always had a passion for language, especially within the Victorian era. So my research had been looking at Victorian asylums, and I was interested in how the language is and has been used to describe people who have had an experience within the mental health system. This was just a starting point for me, and when I first started looking into Bobby's work, and here are some of the images I first started to delve deeper into. Next slide, please. So I also looked into articles and newspapers of Bobby's work, as well as Victorian asylums. Although I was intrigued by the language, I felt I came to a stumbling block as to where to take this further. So I went back to Bobby's work, and I realised I was drawn to the work as abstracted forms with bold colours, something that I never do within my own work. I was also reminded of the female surrealists and wanted to really push myself and explore the portraiture, something I also have never done. I researched into female surrealists and their own work. These are some of the examples that I started to explore. So I found a connection between portraiture and Bobby's work, particularly the abstracted work, and surrealist women. I really wanted to explore further and push myself out of my comfort zone as much as possible, as I'd never explored portraits, I'd never made a portrait. So I didn't want to avoid it, I wanted to kind of confront it. So going back to seeing Bobby's use of text and language, I started to think of the question, how would we read an image? Next slide, please. So I started with these, the emoji self-portraits. emojis have replaced a lot of today's words with things like WhatsApp and Facebook. So I found these emoji balloons. So I made a series of these self-portraits of various emoji faces, and this is just a snippet. So I wanted to keep pushing, as this was very much out of my comfort zone, exploring oneself. Next slide, please. So I'd moved on to using photocopies of myself to gain a quick and fast self-portraits. I then moved on to using a thermal camera. So this is just an example, and I didn't want to blind myself. Next slide. So this is a thermal camera collage. So these images are made up of fragments of my face using a thermal camera. The print out is in black and white and in a square format. While still working with the photocopies, I felt I was reaching its limit. I kept going back to Bobby's drawings and also comparing this to surrealist women's paintings. I began to see these works gave us fragments of information, fragments of stories, fragments of bodies. I personally found self-portraits extremely difficult, and it was easier for me to see myself in fragmented form. This is where this technique became handy, and also I was able to manipulate the final images as I wished to. Here are some examples. So this is an example. It also wasn't printed in order, so I made up my face. Next slide, please. So again, I came back to that feeling of there's just something missing. There is more to this. I want to go back to Bobby's drawings and really compared these to the surrealist women's that I'd been looking at. I went back to the asylum records I'd also been working with from the Victorian era, and domestic life had been, and I felt needed to be included within my work. So I started to look at these images of Bobby's included here. I started to look at other artists, Marie Oppenheim, Furcupping portraits, Frida Kahlo, Leonora Carrington, Dorothea Tannen, and that's just to name a few. So I was trying to tie it together. Next slide, please. So realizing I wanted to pull all my interests that interweaved with one another, so the mental asylum, surrealism, and domestic life, I wanted to show a humorous side to it and to open up the conversation. Some of the research I had done exploring Victorian women showed that them being put into an asylum for refusing to do housework or domestic life. So taking facts like this and looking at Bobby's work and finding the domestic settings hidden within the surrealist women's lives, a thought was born: the domestic rebellion. So pictured here are a pair of marigold gloves with punk spikes and the text that reads domestic rebellion. So domestic life and food I started to explore from World War II propaganda, as I felt a domestic rebellion slogan fit into that quite well. I looked at posters and adverts from World War II and formed some collages. Next slide, please. So over the duration of the course, I wanted to push myself very much out of my comfort zone, as I've mentioned. I normally completely avoid exploring my own self. These images are the final outcomes from all of the research from the Victorian archives found at the Wellcome Collection, Mental Health Asylum. Case studies, court records were really examining just the language. So to Bobby's own life and daily life drawings, and then to the surrealist women. I feel that these works pull all of that together. Next slide, please. So I was able to repush a narrative of this work. I realised I was interested in all the things that linked together and found a way to explore that. So going forward from this project, I've looked into historical archive of female artists to see if domestic life interfered with their creative practice. This is still an ongoing project. So as my work mentioned, it's more research-based currently, and as I'm working with the Liverpool Hope University, Display Arts in Shropshire, Display Arts Online to explore digital access within the arts. So my work with restriction is also ongoing, and I'm working with an all-male prison on a smaller scale open call on the theme of restriction. So in June in 2023, the restriction exhibition will be on show at Exeter Cathedral. And I just wanted to say this is my final image from the outcome from Bobby's course. So thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. That was fantastic to hear all of the kind of work that you've explored there.
Okay.
You've got some comments in the chat.
Okay.
Mostly about the gloves.
Oh yeah, I have them here.
Oh, do you?
I don't know if you can see that. Yep.
Yeah.
And they actually, you can do the washing up with them on. They don't leak.
They not.
No, I don't know. No.
Spikes.
Yeah, I don't know if it picks up on the camera.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah.
Well, Jennifer says, I need a pair of those gloves.
Yeah, there's no problem, made to order.
Kevin says, this is really awesome, Amanda, brilliantly presented. Sarah loves the gloves too. Melissa sends applause.
Oh, thank you.
Sarah says, fantastic and interesting work. Maddie says, thank you, great work, very interesting to hear your process and your research.
Oh, thank you. It's really kind, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll let you read the rest. But Bobby says, fabulous work and brilliant presentation too.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Thank you for presenting. That was amazing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been good.
Yeah, I think if we get time at the end, I want to ask you about this thermal camera, and also I'm intrigued about, you know, this threat of kind of mental health institutions being kind of there for women in Victorian times if they didn't comply with being, you know, domestic kind of servants. So yeah, that's quite shocking to hear that.
Yeah.
But we'll go on now to Myriam and Myriam Crété, who is originally from France. Myriam is a multidisciplinary artist, designer and creative strategist who is now based in London. And she is inspired by positive activism and the evolution of consciousness. Myriam uses everyday materials to give them new purpose, revealing their often overlooked true beauty. There's many more things to explore on Myriam's website, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Myriam to tell us about what she did with the Exploring Collections work. So I will hand over to Myriam.
Thank you, Anna. Right, so you already presented me. Thank you for being here to everyone. So yeah, my practice is drawn from a creative career in the world of images and my lightning spiritual awakening, which happened while sectioned in a psychiatric ward. And following my artistic coming out, as I call it, I am very inspired by the evolution of consciousness to access soul identity and true self-expression. And I like to explore the interconnectedness or fragile equilibrium between creativity, spirituality, and emotional intelligence. And also, and I put craziness in brackets and creativity, and I call that crazivity. So, you know, these kind of bipolarity phases that a lot of artists go through sometimes. My project is called, my research project on Bobby Becker's diary drawings, Mental Illness and Me, is called Recovery, and recover why it matters. So I'm playing on the why here, and it was presented at the Welcome Collection in July 22. Oh, yes, next slide, please, Anna. I forget, I can't access them. So we had the privilege to have access to Bobby Becker's diaries drawings for a long period of time where she stayed in the ward. And it was really interesting for me to live with them and explore them one by one and really try to find what was the inspiration that I was resonating with. And in fact, quickly it came about all the moments of joy she expresses in her drawings. Despite the despair and the very difficult moments that she had in the ward, you could feel she had moments of joy through connection with others, admiring, you know, nature's beauty, celebrating some moments, self-awareness, self-humor. She has a lot of humor and mischievousness, and yeah, and artistic inspiration as well. So it was interesting to see how joy can happen in every moment of despair, and it's a question of finding it. Next slide, please. I also resonated a lot with Bobby's, I don't know if it's her motto, but, you know, she talked a lot about drop the disorder. That really resonated with me. You know, before my episode, I never entered this world of what I call mental nest. And I say it's a big mess. That's my slide in the middle. It's, you know, where to go. You get so many experts, you know, ways to go. You don't really understand. The people with you don't understand what happens either. It takes time. Yeah, it's a real mess. And I think when Bobby said drop the disorder, I think it's nice for oneself, first of all, not to necessarily label ourselves as, you know, with mental health issues, despite I find England really advanced in the way they look at that. I think it's important for others as well, the society and future generation. I do think deep inside that we all have, you know, mental challenges that are not always expressed, and that we try to fit in a society. So I'm not surprised we have more and more coming out of that. Next slide, please. So my focus to research, I decided to concentrate on what's the path to recovery. It's lovely to explore Bobby Baker's journey through her recovery, and her last drawing that for me really resonated a lot. And, you know, why, how to get there, and you know, what it takes to feel better and to be on a path of recovery. So I decided to explore the usual suspects of, you know, all the information available, the facts and figures, the surveys, the experts, and the blah, 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 and also look through the internet. And the result was, if I can have the next slide, please. The result was I was absolutely, totally overwhelmed. You know, it really took me to my knees, thinking, well, there's no way I can do this project. I have no idea where to start. It's far too wide for me. And I think as a creative mind, it's like, if I don't have limits, I don't know where to go. So I went back to myself. I'm a visual and conceptual person. I am very relational, and also I like sensory and experiences. So going back to my roots, I'm coming from a family who have been printing magazines for a long time. And so, you know, a source for me of inspiration and resource is magazines. So I discovered the world of the zines. So for those of you who don't know what a zine is a handmade magazine. And to people, that's my two areas. So if I can have the next slide, please, Anna. So my research focused on two main points. I explored the zines collection at the Wellcome Library, which is very rich, from various artists who have experienced mental health challenges and, you know, who are giving tips about mental self-care. So I was really after finding ways of, you know, tips and techniques and all that, almost like collecting a library or a bank of tips that could be shared. My second focus was conducted in-person interviews with various artists and creative minds on their recipe for mental sanity. And I like the idea to encapsulate their answers through, you know, one image, one smell, one sound, one taste, one touch. So the results were, if I can have the next slide, please. So a lot of answers to my survey. This is just an extract. And it was interesting because, you know, a lot of people said many things, you know, have fun, take a holiday, take time out, organize things, don't organize things, write checklists, don't write checklists. So it was really interesting how every tip had its other side version as well. So I decided to visualize them through pictures and drawing, and just to give a visual feel to it. And it's interesting because really the conclusion and of this observatory and this library is that it's very universal tips. It's a discipline for sure. It's a self-discipline. It's an individual practice and a holistic practice. Every answers I got were very much about body, mind, and soul. And it's an ongoing practice. It's an everyday, like you take a shower or you eat, there's no way you do one day and that's done. So it's a responsibility. It's also a collective point. Everybody I interviewed, need at some point to connect with others, people, animals, plants, with a living other being. And interestingly, and without surprise, all these, recovery tips are what money can't buy. Usually, nobody surprisingly told me, go and buy yourself a Ferrari or a very expensive pair of shoes. So it's very, it's what money can't buy, which that's the good news. It's free and very accessible. Not saying it's easy. Can I have the next slide, please? So I decided it was important for me to give a creative response to my research, and I've explored many, many mad zines. Like all the zines I've explored at the library were called mad zines, probably coming from people considering themselves mad. And as I was really drawn to these moments of joy and realizing my own joy in the process, I decided to create a joy zine. So the title of this zine, which I'm applying for grants to get published at the moment, is called Get Me Out of Here, I'm an Artist, a self-help guide to mental sanity. And the idea is to collect all the tips I got from this holistic fulfillment needs from the bottom up. So you might recognize here centers of energy or chakras, and it's really how to balance everything in order to be fulfilled. Again, easier said than done. Can I have the next slide, please? So that's the zine I created. And, so each chapter is giving advice on what I practice myself and, other things that I've gathered from experts and other artists. The idea for this zine would be to be enriched with more answers from other artists and creative mind, and also experts' views, psychologists, spiritual leaders, medical experts, so that it would create really a rich magazine about how to get better. It's titled My Recipe for Mental Sanity, so I'm sure we all have recipes for that and what's the best for each of us. The last picture on this slide is a happy soul, and I find with myself that if I slow, I get time to grow, to glow, and to flow, and it's an infinite cycle and circle of do it again. So it's a real practice and a discipline. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'm very, very grateful for Bobby Baker's access to her work and to herself, because we met her in person, and also obviously outside in, and Julia, the facilitator, and Daily Life Limited, Bobby Baker's charity. Through this work, I realized how much my work is full of colors and it's very positive, which I'm not always. And I came to this recovery through finding joy. And now my work focuses on an umbrella that I call joyology. And, you know, calling myself a joyologist, I'd love to live as a joyologist every day, as a daily posology to tackle mental health challenges and help others to cultivate the art to find and choose joy as a catalyst for happiness. So I continue to research this, you know, and experience and collaborate with people to find, you know, ways to keep up. And I find that taking a playful approach to shed the light on the matters of the mind and the interior life is a way for me to invite my audience to dig deep within, and to find, you know, to reconnect to inner joy, inner child, to really truly self-express and be who we are and meant to be, and shine our true colors to the world. Thank you very much for your listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Myriam. That was really wonderful. I don't know if we have any comments immediately in the chat, Beth, at all.
Yeah, so we've got Eva says, love your process, especially how you visualize the list of tips, inspirational. Kevin says, thank you, Myriam. This is great research and an awesome presentation. I can relate a lot to this. Sarah says, such interesting research, Myriam. Joe says, I need that on a shirt. Overwhelmed is a familiar feeling. And then there were a couple of comments for Amanda about the Mental Health Museum, which Amanda can read. Does anyone have any questions for Myriam?
I'll just go on to the final slide. Just to say thank you very much to the artist and audience. And that was a fantastic share out, hearing all about that particular kind of focus on that Bobby Baker Diaries, and wonderful to hear how two of the artists presented today and, you know, did work in very different ways with that collection, which was so interesting to sort of see those journeys and progression of the work. Well, just before we come out of the PowerPoint, I just want to say that our next share art is the 22nd of February. It's going to be a physical event at the Bethlehem Gallery in London. So if anyone's interested, there's information on the Outside In website. Okay, so I'll just come out of the share art, so PowerPoint.
There are a couple of more comments in the chat.
Okay.
So Eva says, very much relate to your work and approach. I will have a look on your website, and I think that's to Bobby, who put in the source of drop-in disorder, and there's a link there for that. Maddie Millett says, fantastic talk, Myriam. I loved how you turned away from all the online research and went to your own and others' experiences. And Bobby says, fantastic presentation, fascinating, and thanks. That's all.
Thank you, Beth. I don't know if whether I'd like to invite perhaps Amanda and Myriam, if you wanted to just say something briefly about how you found working with the collection, and, you know, how that's kind of, you know, just that sort of process of working with an archive like that, whether it might be of interest to people here in the audience.
Shall I start? For me, it was a real first about researching a collection and finding inspiration through another artist in that deep form. Like, you know, we all inspired by artists, but it's also finding within all Bobby's work what really resonated the most. And I love, you know, I love Bobby Baker's way of being herself in a way, which It's a real inspiration for me, and I haven't yet done that at all in a form that I wish. And it's yeah, the Wellcome library is so vast that I think it's also, you know, how to narrow down the research in a way that makes sense for you and for the project. Like I could feel my mind was going like that. So it's about narrowing down and getting a structure, and enjoy the FOMO, to get the JOMO, you know, the joy of missing out by, you know, deciding to leave out some things for another day, another time.
Thank you, Myriam. I think that's one of the hardest things, isn't it, when you're working with such a rich archive, is how do you sort of select things and just focus on a few things.
And I would just add that meeting Bobby in person and hearing her talks, and it was really great to have all these different forms of, you know, explanation of her drawings and other work that she's done. That was really really interesting as well.
Thank you. I don't know, Amanda, is there anything you'd like to add to what you know, how you found it?
Yeah, it was fascinating. I mean, I've done some archival work before, but most of the time the artists are no longer with us. So it was great that we had Bobby. And it was just a really interesting process, especially for me, because Bobby's work is so far removed from mine in technique and style. So it's a real challenge. Initially I really struggled, because I was like, my God, bloody hell am I doing that? Like, this is just ridiculous. But it allowed freedom to have fun with the archive, with Bobby, looking at the work, and it was really nice to have permission to have a laugh, because I think sometimes you look at other people's work and you're examining it in a certain way, it can be quite rigorous and regimented, and we didn't have to be like that. So that was really nice. And yeah, for me, it's definitely an artistic journey and a very different process to how I usually work. And it was nice to, you know, pull lots of my own interests into this project as well. And I think if you are interested in archives, that's something I'd highly recommend, is find something you're interested in and explore it, and, you know, challenge that as well, because it's brilliant fun, and yeah, steep learning curve, and it's just great. So yeah, thank you to Outside In and then everyone that is involved in the project, because it was fascinating, and yeah, spurred me on, like Myriam, into a different path. Like, I'm, you know, still looking at domestic life and, you know, surrealism and women's domestic backgrounds, and how that I chose the word interfered quite purposely with their creative practice. So yeah, as I say, very different to my previous work. So yeah, it's fascinating.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Amanda. I really appreciate your honesty about, actually sometimes it's not necessarily an easy thing to come into a project like this, and it might present challenges that, you know, can be quite tricky to navigate to start with. And, you know, it's really lovely to hear that it's also continuing to resonate with you as an artist. And I'm sure, yeah, it will kind of like continue in your practice, you know, for many moments to come.
Yeah, and I think just to follow from that, I think what was really fascinating is that things that, you know, we all have our personal interests for our artistic life, but what I found is for my domestic setting does come into play, and I hadn't realised that before. So things I'd never even thought of really did come into this project, and that was great. And I think looking at other people's work very closely does that for you, and can give you the opportunity to do that. You know, like with Myriam, and I opened up loads of doors for Myriam's work for the duration of the course. So yeah, it was really great.
Thank you.
I think Joe's got their hand up.
Okay, Joe.
Oh yeah. Can you hear me all right?
It's quite quiet at the minute. I don't know.
Hang on. Is that better?
Yes, that's better.
Okay, cool. It was not a question, it was definitely more of a comment. So thank you, obviously, first of all, for sharing. And it's really interesting, as someone that's been on a different Exploring Collections course, to hear the themes and the way the art was explored by others, even though we're all apart and we've all done these, I guess, quite insular studies, there's so many common threads. And as somebody that is still living very much within the grips of a mental illness and still very much in therapy, it's really encouraging to know that there's a connection even when you feel lonely. And I guess that's what I wanted to say, is that even though sometimes that's exactly how it feels, there's such a universal connection and language between art and creativity and people. So I just want to say thank you, and I think the work's amazing.
Thank you, Jo. That's really lovely to hear your comments, and of course, you know, having done your own kind of exploring collections, it was in Wakefield, wasn't it? You know, it's really lovely to hear, you know, your kind of sort of thoughts on that too. Do we have anyone else would like to perhaps ask a question or make any comments? We have a few more minutes before we need to finish. I don't know whether Bobby is still with us, whether Bobby has any sort of thoughts as well about how it was to share that archive with artists.
Well, I always seem to get a lot of chance to express myself, so thank you for inviting me. I'm so pleased to be here, because it was such an incredible sort of delight and privilege to have people involved in this way who were artists, but also kind of, it was like I said, and I don't think I expressed it very well, it can be very lonely as an artist, even if people are seeing your work. You know, that what's so great is to sort of share things, and through the presentations, and there was some welcome ideas, how it connects us. And when you go and see work, you sort of connect with it, but to have an opportunity to take it further and talk about it, I just thought was amazing. And I have really loved being part of it, and I'm just a bit sad it's ending, I suppose, and hope we can all get together again. You know, it's that thing of you just don't get chances like this and to connect with things, and I'm really grateful to Outside In, but also the funding for this and digitising diary drawings came through the Cultural Recovery Fund and a crafty fundraiser who and an opportunity through the Arts Council. So it's been very I've been trying to get them digitised for years, so this has been a terrific bonus on top of that. Thank you. And I hope, we're kind of evaluating the whole project at the moment, that we can connect with the artists again a bit with that, but also just look at ways that the digitized diary drawings can be available to people online with Outside In or DAX artists sort of thing. But thank you very much for asking my opinion yet again.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you so much for your contribution, and you know, for being here today for the Share Art event as well. And really interesting to hear, you know, your how, you know, the experience was for you as well, you know, because I mean, sharing your work in the archive with the artists, that's a really interesting thing. And you know, yeah, it's lovely to kind of hear all the kind of, you know, different elements of that whole project, and I can imagine it must feel quite sad that it kind of comes to an end, but you know, we've got it kind of sort of as a document now, so it's part of your legacy, I guess, and also the legacy of the artists who are engaging with it as well. But also just picking up on what Jo was saying about, you know, feeling that sometimes it can feel with the mental health sort of, you know, I guess issues, that sometimes you can feel isolated. And I think something like this, you know, brings things back into the community again of artists, and is a really wonderful opportunity to share things. Okay, is there anything else anyone would like to say? No, I think so. Perhaps we should draw the event to
Anna,
yeah.
Sorry, just before you disappear, I just wanted to say, touching on what Bobby just said there about things coming to an end. I feel like these things never really truly do come to an end, and I know the Step Up program's definitely set me on a particular course to do with exploring how we're labelled as people with illnesses, and which ones we want to keep and which ones we want to discard, especially in a curatorial setting. And I can't say too much at the moment, but there's been funding secured for research on patient artworks. And so if Bobby would like to be a part of that, I'd absolutely love him to be a part of it in some research events over the course of 2023, 2024, looking at how you are referred to. Are you a patient that made artwork, or did you make artwork and happen to be a patient? So that extends to anybody in chat. If you want to be a part of it, then please reach out to Beth, and Beth can pass it on to me. Because these things never truly end. As Myriam quite rightly said, it's an ongoing process. So.
Thank you, Jo. Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that to our attention, Jo, and you know, for sharing that as well. And I think, you know, that's very pertinent, that these things, they feel like they kind of physically end, but, you know, I think they continue to kind of resonate, and they do, you know, those connections will continue, hopefully. So, okay. So thank you so much again to the artists for presenting, and, you know, for sort of sharing your experience of being involved in the Exploring Collections project. And thank you so much to Bobby for coming today as well, and also everyone in the audience who came, and all your amazing contributions, and the community that kind of is outside in. And thank you to Beth for co-hosting with me as well. So we'll finish there, and hopefully we will see everybody at some point at future Share Art events. And there's the next one in February on the 22nd. So hope everyone has a lovely day.
For your facilitation as well, and Beth for organizing.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And
Lovely to see
everyone.
you all.